In a small, fog-covered town nestled in the mountains, there stood an old inn that had long since fallen into disrepair. It was a place the locals avoided, a relic of a bygone era, with a reputation for being haunted by the spirits of those who had died within its walls. The inn, known as the Whispering Pines, had been closed for decades, its windows boarded up, its doors chained shut, but every once in a while, a light would flicker in one of the windows and strange noises would echo through the empty halls. The townsfolk told stories of the inn, of the terrible events that had occurred there, and of the spirits that now haunted its rooms. They spoke in hushed tones of room 13, the most cursed room of all, where anyone who stayed the night would never be seen again. But the inn had fallen into the hands of a distant relative of the original owners, a young man named Daniel, who had inherited the property after the last of his family had passed away. He was a skeptic, a man who believed in nothing but cold, hard facts, and he dismissed the tales of hauntings as nothing more than superstition. Daniel decided to restore the inn, seeing it as an opportunity to make a fortune by capitalizing on the town's legends. He was determined to reopen the Whispering Pines, to prove that the stories were just that, stories, with no basis in reality. He arrived at the inn on a rainy autumn day, the air thick with the scent of wet leaves and decay. The inn loomed before him, its once grand facade now crumbling, its windows dark and lifeless. But Daniel saw only potential, a chance to bring the place back to life. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the empty lobby. The air was stale, thick with dust, and the lingering scent of old wood and mold. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, and the shadows seemed to stretch and shift as he moved. Ignoring the eerie atmosphere, Daniel set to work. He cleaned and repaired the lobby, dusted off the old furniture, and began the long process of restoring the inn to its former glory. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, but he dismissed it as nothing more than his imagination. Weeks passed, and the inn began to take shape, the rooms once again ready to welcome guests. But there was one room Daniel had not yet touched, room 13. It was the only room in the inn that remained locked, the key lost to time. One evening, as Daniel sat by the fire in the lobby, sipping a glass of whiskey, he found himself staring at the door to room 13. The stories of the room, of the terrible things that had happened there, began to creep into his mind. He had always prided himself on his rationality, on his refusal to believe in the supernatural. But something about that room unnerved him. It was as if the door was calling to him, beckoning him to uncover the secrets it held. Determined to put his fears to rest, Daniel decided to break the lock and see what lay behind the door of room 13. He grabbed a crowbar and made his way down the dimly lit hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. The door to room 13 was old and worn, the wood splintered and cracked. Daniel took a deep breath and jammed the crowbar into the crack between the door and the frame. With a grunt, he pried the door open, the lock snapping with a loud crack. The door swung open with a creak, revealing a dark, musty room. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Daniel hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a single bed pushed up against the far wall, a dresser, and a mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floor was thick with dust. As Daniel stepped further into the room, he noticed something strange. The bed was made, the sheets crisp and clean, as if someone had just prepared it for a guest. but the rest of the room was in disarray, as if it had been abandoned for years. He moved to the dresser and opened the drawers, finding them empty except for a single, faded photograph. He picked it up and studied it, his brow furrowing in confusion. The photograph showed a young couple, smiling and happy, standing in front of the inn. But as he looked closer, Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The man in the photograph looked just like him, same build, same features, even the same clothes he was wearing at that moment. Daniel's hands trembled as he placed the photograph back in the drawer, his mind racing. It was impossible, just a coincidence, he told himself, but the unease in his stomach grew, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. He turned to leave the room, but as he did, the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. Daniel froze, his heart pounding in his ears as the temperature in the room plummeted. His breath came out in white puffs, and he felt a presence behind him. Slowly, he turned around, his eyes wide with fear. The mirror on the wall reflected not just his image, but something else, an indistinct figure standing just behind him, its features obscured by shadow. Daniel's blood ran cold as he realized that the stories about room 13 might not have been just stories after all. He took a step back, his hand fumbling for the doorknob. But it wouldn't budge. The presence in the room grew stronger, pressing down on him, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. Then, without warning, the figure in the mirror moved, stepping out of the reflection and into the room. It was a man, or at least what had once been a man, his face twisted and grotesque, his eyes hollow and empty. The ghostly figure reached out a hand, and Daniel felt a cold, clammy grip on his shoulder. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. His voice caught in his throat as terror seized him. But then something unexpected happened. The figure, instead of harming Daniel, began to laugh, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the room. It was a laugh filled with bitterness and sorrow, a laugh that sent shivers down Daniel's spine. The figure released its grip on Daniel and stepped back, its laughter subsiding into a low chuckle. "You're just like me," the ghost said, its voice raspy and hollow. "Trapped by your own ambition, blinded by your greed." Daniel stared at the ghost, his mind reeling. He had expected horror, terror, but this was something else entirely. The ghost seemed almost sad, as if it were not the fearsome specter he had imagined, but a lost soul, trapped in a cycle of misery. "Who are you?" Daniel managed to choke out, his voice trembling. The ghost sighed, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. "I was once the owner of this inn," it said, its voice heavy with regret. "I too thought I could profit from the legends, that I could turn a quick profit by exploiting the fears of others. But the inn, it doesn't just hold the past, it holds onto it. It traps those who seek to use it for their own gain." Daniel's heart sank as he realized the truth. The ghost was a warning, a reflection of what he could become if he continued down this path. The inn, the cursed room 13, it wasn't just haunted, it was a prison, holding the souls of those who had fallen victim to its lure. As the ghost continued to speak, Daniel felt a deep sorrow welling up inside him. He had been so focused on his own ambitions, on his desire to prove the legends wrong, that he had ignored the warnings, the signs that something was deeply wrong. But now it was too late. The ghost had been right. He was just like it, trapped by his own greed, his own hubris. He was a prisoner of the inn, just like all the others who had come before him. The ghost's form began to fade, its voice growing weaker. "Leave this place," it whispered. "Leave before it's too late. But remember, you can't escape what you've become." With that, The ghost vanished, leaving Daniel alone in the dark, silent room. The air was heavy with despair, and Daniel felt the weight of his own mistakes pressing down on him. He had come to the inn with dreams of fortune, but now all he wanted was to escape, to leave behind the horrors he had uncovered. But as he reached for the door, he realized with a sinking feeling that the inn wasn't done with him yet. The door swung open on its own, revealing a long, dark hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls were lined with portraits, each one showing the face of a different person, a different victim of the inn's curse. Daniel stepped into the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The portraits seemed to watch him as he passed, their eyes following his every move. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that he was now one of them, a part of the inn's dark history. But even in the midst of his fear, there was a strange sense of peace. The inn had shown him the truth, had forced him to confront his own flaws and failures, and in that moment, Daniel understood that he could